last time. And just a recap, we have already enumerated at least the two most common causes of language delay in children. And may I know if you remember that, Yason, Maria, Carissa? Hello? Carissa? We have discussed two causes of language delay in children last time. Do you remember what these are? Anyone? Fabros?
Yes po, diniscuss po yesterday po is about the motor delay po, language communication disorders, then
No, what was
oh,
what I was asking was, we have already discussed two most common causes of language delay, or two causes of language delay in children. What were these? Do you remember? What is the first thing that you have to rule out in any child who presents with language delay? Hmm? No one? All right, hearing loss. That's one. What else? What else? Remember the condition that we term as developmental language disorder, right? And that is the medical term for what? A late bloomer. You remember now? All right, so we move on to other common causes of language delay in children. One of these is intellectual disability, and in fact, it used to be the most common cause of language delay because speech delay is universal in intellectual disability, used to be called mental retardation. Okay? So, what is the definition of ID? It refers to a group of disorders that have in common deficits of adaptive and intellectual function and an age of onset before maturity is reached. The reason why we're trying to shy away from the term intellectual mental retardation is because MR is stigmatizing and it tends to limit the achievements of an individual. So this is the most acceptable and recent updated definition of ID. It says here that it is a significant impairment in general intellectual function because the IQ and the IQ therefore is approximately 2 standard deviations below the mean. But more than the IQ, take note that what is a very important criterion is a significant impairment in adaptive behavior and or daily function, and this include your conceptual, social, and practical skills. And the onset should be before 22 years of age or adulthood. In the in the previous definitions, the onset is placed at 18 years and below. Now, as to incidence, it occurs in about 2.5% of the population, majority of which are in the mild to moderate range. And as far as the etiology is concerned, majority are of chromosomal and genetic. However, take note that in about 20% of cases, the exact etiology is unknown. Well, based on the IQ, we still classify ID as mild, moderate, severe, and profound. And of all the chromosomal disorders, the one that is most common cause of ID is Down syndrome. So Down syndrome or trisomy 21 has three classifications or subtypes. You have the full trisomy, which is very typical in terms of the facial features. Then you have the mosaic. You see these two children here on my right side. You notice that there is less of the physical features of DS, and at the same time, there is less affectation of the cognitive ability. So that is the mosaic type of DS. Then you have the translocation type of DS. So by the way, the full trisomy is usually present in about 90 to 95% of cases of DS, while the mosaic and translocation in about 2% of cases. Now, the incidence of DS is 1 out of 700 babies. And it is a common notion and a fact that maternal age, meaning advancing maternal age, is one of the risk factors in DS. So much so that if the age of the mother is 40 years, the risk or incidence of having a DS is 1 out of 100. And if the mother is 45 years and older, it is 1 out of 30. At birth, here are the common signs or what we call principal features. First and foremost is hypotonia. So that when you see a newborn wherein you are suspecting DS, then you have to make sure that you test for the muscle tone. So there is hypotonia, there is poor motor reflex, there is hyperflexibility of the joints, excess skin on the back of the neck, and a flat facial profile. DS is commonly associated with medical problems. About 50% has or have congenital heart disease, visual and hearing impairment, 10% have intestinal malformations, and that there is a very high incidence of Alzheimer's disease or dementia when they reach the age of 50 years and above. And of course, an increased risk of medical problems like hypothyroidism and leukemia. These children can live a normal lifespan. In fact, the average lifespan is 60 years. But what usually shortens the lifespan is that if they have medical conditions that are untreated, like your congenital heart disease. So what are the developmental characteristics of DS? More often than not, they are delayed in their development. And it is not only one aspect of their development or domain is delayed. More often than not, it's global. 2 or more areas are delayed. But very obvious during the first few months of life because of the hypotonia is a delay in the motor skills. So these are the physical features of a patient with DS. So if you take a look at this one, they have what we call the pictures in here. You have a flat facial profile, a flat occiput. You notice this flat nasal bridge, epicanthal folds here. You have a protruding tongue. The protruding tongue is not because the tongue is big, but because of the relative hypoplasia of the mandibular cavity or the oral cavity, which eventually will disappear as the child grows older. and of course, the upward slanting of the palpebral fissures. Take note that the simian crease is not pathognomonic of DS. It may or it may not be present, and but you notice that there is a gap between the first and the second toes, and we call that the sandal or the saddle gap toe. So these are Filipino children with DS, simply showing to us the epicanthal folds here, the flat nasal bridge, upward slanting of the palpebral fissures. You have the protruding tongue, you have the simian crease, and the sandal gap toes. So ID has also risk factors, not only genetic, but also a significant perinatal history. You can read this in Nelson's, the common presentations of IDs according to the different age groups. So during the infancy period, gross motor delay, as I have always been mentioning, is very significant, and it is actually the area of concern. But when the child becomes a toddler, or during the preschool age, then the main presentation is language delay. But when the child goes into school age, then definitely the presentation is academic underachievement or school failure. As I have mentioned earlier, we still use the IQ testing to classify the intellectual disability or mental retardation. And based on the IQ, you have here the classification, whether the child is borderline, mild, moderate, and severe. And why is it important that we need to know what is the degree or classification of ID? Because this will also help us plan our goals for management for these children and what the prognosis will be. So if you are dealing, for instance, with a child with a mild ID, you know that this is a child who is educable, and therefore he has good chances of at least going to a regular school and even probably finishing a vocational course. Whereas if you are in the moderate degree, you are trainable in the sense that you can be independent with self-care or self-help skills, as well as being able to do activities of daily living, becoming also as a functional adult and not a burden to your family. So we also have this from the WHO, again, in terms of severity of intellectual disability and what are the capabilities of a child as they become adults. So what is the difference between intellectual disability and global developmental delay that you often hear? So global developmental delay simply means that the child is delayed in 2 or more areas of development. And it usually is the medical term or diagnosis that is given during the first 5 years of life. But beyond the age of 5 years, when the child continues to be delayed globally, then this term, medical term of GDD, shifts into intellectual disability. And by the way, GDD can be a very non-specific diagnosis that it can also be given initially as a diagnosis for cerebral palsy and or autism spectrum disorder. Then you have visual impairment, which actually are what we call central processing disorders. Peripheral processing disorders you have your visual and hearing impairment. So I just touch a little bit on visual impairment, and it is defined as a measured visual acuity of 20/200 or worse in the better eye, and that the severity of visual impairment is defined using the WHO categories. So you can say that a child has low vision if his visual acuity is between 20/70 to 20/400, and it is already considered blindness if it is worse than 20/400. All right. So now I would like to share with you the other common cause of language delay. In fact, I must say that it is the very common cause of language delay that we see now among our children. And can you make a good guess of that? That is autism spectrum disorder. So I will really dwell like about 20 minutes on this condition, because I'm sure you will all agree that when you get into the clinics or when you will go into practice, this is the most common condition that you see in terms of developmental problems among children. Okay, so ASD or autism spectrum disorder is not a fad. As most parents would often say, Doktora, in layman's term, uso-uso lang po yan, Doc. That's not true. All right, ASD has been in existence since the early 19th century. However, it was initially used to describe a subset of schizophrenic patients. So in other words, ASD initially was considered to be a form of a childhood schizophrenia. However, in 1943, Leo Kanner, who is a child psychiatrist, described children, 11 children who were intelligent. However, they displayed a desire for being alone and obsession or repetitive or fixation with sameness. And therefore, he was the one who gave us the term for the first time, early infantile autism. Then in 1944, a German scientist, this was Hans Asperger, described a milder form of autism. It was known as Asperger's syndrome. But later on, I will tell you that this is not anymore being used for as a term for milder forms of ASD. And then in 1967, psychologists gave out the theory that ASD is said to be born to so-called refrigerator parents. But you know for a fact that this is not true. And then in 1980, infantile autism was listed in the DSM. And in 1994, Asperger's syndrome is added also to the DSM. In 1998, there was a study which was suggesting or linking the MMR vaccine as a cause of autism. However, in 2000, you will also notice later on that this is not true and that this was disputed later on. And then in 2000, some vaccine manufacturers, because of fear that their vaccines will not be bought anymore, they removed the thimerosal, which is a mercury-based preservative, which they claim is responsible. for ASD. In 2013, however, the DSM-5 came up with the term ASD, or Autism Spectrum Disorder, as the umbrella term to now define, diagnose, or describe autism, and that Asperger's syndrome is no longer considered a separate condition. So that if parents will be asking you, Doc, does my child have Asperger's syndrome? Then you have to correct the mother that Asperger's syndrome is not being used anymore, and instead what we use is ASD, which can be classified as mild, moderate, severe, with corresponding levels of support. So what do we know about autism? It is a complex developmental disability that typically appears during the first 3 years of life, and that it is a neurological disorder that affects the brain, and that it is characterized by impairment in social interaction, deficits in communication, and there is the presence of repetitive, stereotypic, and or restricted patterns of behavior. Take note that ASD can occur in all ethnic and social economic groups and affects every age group. So always remember that ASD is a developmental disorder, and therefore it is a condition that the child is believed to be born with or born with a potential for developing. Because most parents would like to blame themselves or things in their environment that maybe was responsible for the ASD of their child, but it is an inborn condition, okay? And up to this time, we know that ASD is lifelong. So I hope that when you hear parents saying that, oh, my child recovered from ASD, then you know that that is not true. Maybe the child really did only show autistic-like manifestations from the very beginning. And this happens when a child presents with language delay. But when the child normalizes and all the signs and symptoms disappear, then we cannot continue to say that the child is autistic. So that is not really autistic from the very beginning, okay? Of all the developmental disabilities, it is autism which has like a 400%, almost 400% increase in prevalence over the past 1 or 2 decades. So you can see here that in the early 2000, it was the prevalence is 1 in 166, but now you know that it is 1 out of 36, especially as described by the CDC in the United States. Take note that in here you can see 10 countries with the highest autism rates in children. And remarkably, it is seen in the Middle East, in Qatar, and the UAE. And we really don't know what the reason for this is. And accordingly, approximately 168 million people worldwide have autism. And again, this is more common among boys, with a ratio of boy is to girl ratio of 4 is. So this is just showing you the rates or prevalence rates of ASD through the years, and we can really claim that it is the fastest growing serious developmental disability, and that the rates are still increasing. This is what I was referring to you earlier, that right now in the US, 1 in 36 children is affected with ASD. So much so that in a Time magazine, it was mentioned whether autism is an epidemic or not. Well, the numbers are really increasing. Why? Because we have a very clear diagnostic criteria now for ASD, right? And it is not like before that they are even considered to be a form of childhood schizophrenia. We have better tools in identification process, and most importantly is the awareness of parents. I can tell you of a lot of anecdotal, if not true stories, that parents come to me now as early as less than 1 year, and the parents would often say, "Doc, I think my child has autism." Less than 1 year of age, because of increasing awareness. So the next question is, what causes autism? It really is very sad because up to this present, even in developed countries, the exact cause is unknown. And that is actually what makes the parents very sad, because if the exact etiology is unknown, then there still is no definite cure. Therefore, it still is lifelong. However, what is proven is that this is biologically based neurodevelopmental disorder that can be inherited as well. Okay? So there are several studies on ASD people, and when they did some imaging of the brain, they have found out that there is a disruption of normal brain development, so much so that a neuroscientist, has mentioned that there seemed to be an aberrant growth in the development of the brain during the first 2 years, so much so that when you look at the head circumferences of children with ASD, it seemingly is bigger or larger than usual children. Okay? And they have also pointed out that based on researches on the biologic basis of ASD, the major brain structures that are implicated are the following. Now, what about genetics? They have found out that a rare mutation involving the deletion or duplication of 25 genes on chromosome 16 was found in over 1% of autism cases in the United States. And that based on studies, they have also came out with an ASD panel, and that is the 61 gene. Moreover, they have found out that twin and family studies also strongly suggest that some people have a genetic predisposition to autism. And yes, I have seen a few cases with 2 or 3 children in the family. Obviously, this is a family with 2 children having ASD. So it has been said that among identical twins, if one of the children has an ASD, then the other will be affected about 60 to 96% of the time. But mind you, I have seen twins wherein the first one is affected, but the second one is not also affected. In non-identical twins, the incidence for the other child to be affected is 0 to 24%. So probably that is the case with the patient that I saw. And not only that, 10% of children with ASDs have identifiable genetic, neurologic, or metabolic disorder like your Fragile X syndrome. So if a parent would ask me, "Doc, What are the chances of me having another child with ASD, given the fact that I already have an ASD child? So you can say that the chances are between 5 to 20%. Okay? It is a little bit higher or greater than the risk for the general population. Now, what about vaccines? If there is one thing that I really would like to emphasize to you is the fact that there is no truth to the fact that vaccination is responsible for ASD. In the past, that was very, very popular and controversial. However, in the Time magazine, again in here, they clearly showed that even with the decreased vaccination rate for MMR, which is the one that is being implicated, there is still a noticeable rise in the incidence of ASD. This is the declining or decreased immunization rate as far as MMR is concerned. And why do you think that MMR of all the vaccines was the one that was implicated? Because in developed countries, MMR vaccination is usually given at 15 to 18 months. And it is during this time that the signs and symptoms of ASD normally appear. And therefore, the only thing that they can think of as a possible cause was the vaccination that was given to their child, which is MMR. Okay, however, as you can see here, this has been disputed. MMR vaccine does not and never did contain thimerosal, which is a mercury preservative, being implicated as the cause of ASD. And this was the psychologist who actually was behind bars because of this controversy. Okay? Now, there are other risk factors that now are being implicated, even too much folate in pregnant women. And take note, cesarean section, C-section, low birth weight, prematurity, they were trying to implicate as possible risk factors of ASD. But at the end, we know that it is genetic, it can be genetic, and that meaning it is genetic may be contributory. There may be some environmental factors, but they have not really pinpointed what is the cause. However, of all the of all the conditions, it is only ASD wherein advancing paternal age is being implicated. So it is not just advancing maternal age now in DS, but in ASD, it can be both advancing paternal and maternal ages. So ASD, as far as etiology is concerned, it is unknown, but it can be multifactorial with a variety of genetic and, to a lesser extent, environmental factors playing a role. So just to summarize everything that we have mentioned, take note that what is believed at the moment is that ASD can be strongly genetic and that it is neurological, that there can be some factors in the environment, but as far as vaccines are concerned, parental practice, remember the refrigerator parents, no. And then diet, no, at this point. All right. So let's move on to the signs and symptoms of ASD. And these are the things that I would like to leave with you and that for you to remember very well so that you will be able to recognize early on a child with ASD. Okay, so what are the common signs of ASD? First is impaired social interaction. So much so that when you call a child with ASD, even if the hearing is intact, there's such a thing as monster. All right? He would respond if he likes. And one test of that is you ask the parent, Mommy, if you call your son, does he respond to you? No, Doc. But if I put on the TV or if the cell phone rings, he immediately turns his attention towards that. So we call that selective attention. It's not a hearing loss, and that is a form of impaired social interaction. Then I'm sure you're all aware about eye contact. And mind you, when you ask a parent about this, you have to be very careful and you have to be what you call makulit in layman's term. Because most parents, when you ask them about it, the very first thing that they will answer, yes, doc, my eye contact po, in layman's term, right? And then when I ask the parent, because I can see the patient is not having an eye contact. In fact, the moment that he enters the clinic, the first thing that he does is to look at the toy rather than looking at me. And when I call his name, he's not even lifting his eye to look at me, his eyes to look at me. And so if I see that, and the parents, I think, doesn't seem to realize that there really is a problem with eye contact, what do? I ask the parent, Mommy, can you please talk to your child? And so the mother will try to call her son, hold on to the face of the child to a certain extent that the child is almost hurt already because he is trying to force the child to look into the eyes of the mother. So eventually the mother will say, oh, doc, he will only look at me for a split second. So that is the way to validate the eye contact among children with ASD. Another thing is that they don't seem to understand what you are feeling as a person in front of them. You get hurt and you're almost crying, and sometimes they're laughing at you. So they tend to lack empathy. Then they engage in a lot of repetitive movements, from spinning themselves, spinning objects, and even hurting themselves, like head banging, biting, and that, of course, because of social skills deficits, they do not interact with other children. They prefer solitary play. But then again, if you ask the parents, Mommy, how is your child? When there are other children around, doc, he is so sociable. So you have to differentiate now between a normal social skill and a deviant social skills. Because some of them, they say hi, hello to everyone. Even if they're meeting these people for the first time, even the security guards. And that is deviant. But on the other hand, even if a child approaches him, he would not interact or would not even pay attention to the child. Definitely, that is a poor social skill. And he would rather do solitary play rather than engage in a make-believe or imaginative play. But take note that play varies across the different ages. Are you familiar with that, Danica Yambao? The different types of play? What are the different types of play that you know of? Even only two. And you have learned this in growth and development again, guys. Come on, Danica.
Parallel play po.
Okay, so when does parallel play normally happen?
2 years po.
And then, can you describe to us what is parallel play?
Yung parang gagayahin po
Can
ng
you kindly answer in straight English, please?
when the child mimic other children po.
So it is simply imitating what the other child is doing. Like one child is running, and here comes this child, and he will imitate the first child. right? That's parallel play. And what is the other type of play that you know? Angela Lubag, I cannot see your face. Angela Lubag. Do you know? Anyone? What about Molly Pelayo? What is the other type of play that you know? Decena Isabella.
Doc,
Yeah?
cooperative play po.
Cooperative play? Are you referring to the make-believe, imaginative, or interactive play? And what age does it usually occur? And at what age does it usually occur?
3 years, Doc.
All right, 3 years of age. So do not forget those things, okay? Because that is one way to find out if the play of the child at this particular age is appropriate or not, okay? So this is one patient of mine who, when he comes to the clinic, would just be doing this. Okay, so the fixation of the mother there is that he is simply the fixation of the child there is that he is simply holding on to this paper and then doing it like this, and he's doing that the whole time, and he's just happy with it. Then you have this other child wherein notice that when I ask him what he's doing. I'm sorry.
One, two, three, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9. How many? 1.
So, notice there the eye contact. I am in front of the child. And you have these stereotypic activities. There you go.
Yeah, get the. Finish. Yeah.
All right, so those are the typical hand stereotypes movement, okay? And among those who are verbal, because, you know, in ASD, you are either verbal or minimally verbal or non-verbal. But among those who are verbal, they usually exhibit pronominal reversal. Instead of referring to themselves as I, they would usually make use of the word you. Like, I'm hungry, you are hungry. Or they speak in a monotonous voice, either high pitch, low pitch, and they prefer to speak in English with a peculiar accent. And you know what accent it is? It's a British accent. Another hallmark of ASD is regression. You often ask the developmental milestones, right? In the developmental history of pediatric patients. And one of the early signs is that when the mother says, my child was able to call me mommy at the age of 8 months or 12 months, but this disappeared or it got lost. So you have to be alerted to that. So approximately 25 to 30% of children with ASDs begin to say words, but then stop speaking between the ages of 15 and 24 months. The other thing is that normally, when a child has limited verbal output, he should be able to make use of gestures to indicate his needs. But what is very common with ASDs is that they do not point. Instead, they pull your hand and bring it to where the object is. And that is often termed as hand leading. So regression, therefore, is a well-documented hallmark of ASDs and should always alert the clinician to consider it as a condition in a child. So what are the very early indicators? There is language delay. Most of them, they present to us with language delay. And there are some of them who exhibit regression, poor eye contact, repetitive activities, right? Like stacking up blocks. You see this child? I gave him the alphabet. He lined up the letters of the alphabet on the bed, and he's simply looking at it. All right? And the later indicators would be problems with social skills or engaging in a make-believe and or repetitive play. And among those, older children, they tend to fixate on certain things. Like I have a patient who every time would come to my clinic is holding on to a figure, to a religious figure. And according to the mother, he's bringing that wherever they are, even up to the time that he's going to bed. And they are very used to following routines. So much so that if, for instance, they are brought to school and suddenly you turn right or left from the usual route that you're supposed to take in going to school, they go into uncontrollable tantrums. Okay? So, these are the core symptoms of ASD, as well as the associated comorbidities. Take note that in the DSM-4 criteria for ASD, there used to be 3 core symptoms, namely impaired social skills, impaired communication, and the presence of stereotypic and or ritualistic activities. However, in the DSM-5, the social and communication skills deficits merge, so much so that there are now 2 core symptoms of ASD, under which in the first core symptom, which is impaired social communication interaction, then the child should meet 3 out of 3 in the restricted repetitive behavior, which is the second core symptom. The child should meet 2 out of 4. Take note that ASD can coexist with other medical conditions, including syndromic epilepsy and learning disability, as well as ADHD. It is said that about 20 to 30% of children with ASD develop epilepsy. And mind you, the epilepsy in ASD is not the usual thing that they go like they have stiffening of the lower extremities or generalized stiffening of the body. Usually, epilepsy is more of behavioral nature. They tend to hurt themselves and hurt the people around them. So if there is a regression in the behavior to a certain extent that this child is now beginning to hurt himself and other people around him, you need to do an EEG because more often than not, the EEG will show epileptiform discharges. And therefore, you need to treat that to lessen the self-injured and aggressive behavior. ASD can also coexist with tics. As you can see here in this patient.
Number 9 is. What about official?
So that is a facial thing. It can also occur, with or torticollis can also coexist with ASD.
What's your
gonna say the shape back.
Okay, what's your name? My name.
It's Paolo Miguel. Yeah.
And how old are you?
7.
Okay, it's time to put back.
And then tell the name.
Yes, and tell the names. All right, go.
You notice the accent there? And the intonation?
Yeah.
Where? Oval. Triangle. Cross.
Time to count. 1.
7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
How many? How many did you
11.
count? Okay. Are you happy? Are you
I
happy?
guess now.
Why? Why are you happy? Are you sad? Yeah.
I just keep remembering about those games I love.
What games?
You know, let's be
And what else?
recitals. Poetry. What do you call contest that is called? A poem contest.
I do not
You
know.
know, when we recite the poem.
Okay, can you recite a poem to Tito Doc?
I kind of already forgot.
You forgot? What about singing a song for Tito Doc?
I don't sing, and they quite there's no town contest.
Do you know how to pray?
Yeah,
Okay, can you show Tito Doc how to pray?
the name of the fund.
Oh, you have to show me.
Also the action.
Of course, and the action.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Amen.
Okay, what do you pray?
Angel of God, may God and be with us in that last day.
Louder.
Angel of God, may God be with
To whom his love.
means me here. Ever this day we at my side, the light and God can be with God.
Who is handsome? Who is foggy?
Wait a minute. Is there any water here?
Yeah, I will ask
Not
them.
tuyuan na po, Tita Doc. All right, this is another patient of mine. While doing something, look at what he's saying. I'm sorry.
75 years of 75 years of 75 years PhD. 75. Number 9, mother. 75 years of 75.
So that is what you call repetitive talking, and that is verbal stim, okay? So how do we make a diagnosis of ASD? There is no laboratory procedure that can be used to make a diagnosis of ASD. It is a two-stage process which involves first screening. Remember, we've talked about developmental screening to validate the recognized risks or delays, and then, of course, a comprehensive evaluation by a multidisciplinary team. So I also mentioned about the fact that the American Academy of Pediatrics has has already recommended the routine screening of all infants for ASDs as part of the 18th and 24th month well baby visit. And this is actually the algorithm that is being used so as to monitor, if not recognize early on ASD. So what are the absolute indications for immediate evaluation? No babbling or pointing or other gestures by 12 months. No single words by 16 months. No two-word spontaneous phrases by 24 months or regression of any area of skills at any age. And specifically, the screening tool for autism is your MCHAT, Modified Checklist for Autism in Toddlers, which should be done between 16 months to 48 months. So this checklist for ASD, the MCHAT, was formulated in the UK. And as mentioned, this is used for children 16 to 48 months. And it has a very high sensitivity of about 85 to around 99%. And of all the questions in the MCHAT, question 7 is the most discriminative. And the question in number 7 is, does your child ever use his or her index finger to point to indicate interest in something? Remember what I have told you? They do not know how to point. Instead, they pull your hand and bring it to where the object is. However, take note that failing the MCHAT is not tantamount to diagnosing ASD. It basically indicates an increased risk for ASD. And therefore, if the child fails this, then the child should be referred for a comprehensive evaluation. Why are we always saying that ASD should be recognized early? Because again, remember the theory of brain plasticity? We believe in early recognition, early intervention, so as to optimize the developmental potential of the child. So this is basically, again, a representation of what happened in the DSM-5. There is merging of the impairment in communication and social skills. And then there is the second core symptom, which is the restricted or the presence of repetitive patterns of behavior. And under the core symptom of deficits in social communication and interaction, the child should fulfill all of these 3 symptoms. So 3 out of 3. And in the second core symptom, the child should fulfill 2 out of 4. Okay? Across the different life stages, you notice that the signs and symptoms, they begin to emerge so that during the early years, you will not necessarily see all the signs and symptoms. And that usually becomes the problem because the mother would often say, "Doc, he's not lining up. Doc, he is not spinning. Doc, he's not like that." But he has problems with eye contact. He has problems with language, and so on and so on. The question that is often being asked of us or of me is, how early can you diagnose ASD? It says here that it can now be diagnosed as early as 18 months of age. But you know what? As I have mentioned, there are some parents who come to us now as early as 1 year or even less. And they are now the ones telling us that it seems that their child is autistic. So this is the DSM-5, and the latest one is in 2013, wherein, as mentioned, the only thing now the only term now that is acceptable for autism is ASD. No more pervasive developmental disorder, no more Asperger's syndrome, and the latest revision of your DSM-5, that is the DSM 5TR. Okay, so how do you differentiate ASD from DSM-4 and DSM-5? As mentioned, a single diagnosis, ASD, replaces the different subdivision, and that the diagnosis is now based on 2 core areas or symptoms, and that the restriction of onset age has been loosened from 3 years of age to early developmental period, and there is a new severity ranking, and you're all familiar with the levels of support or functional levels of ASD. You have level 1, level 2, and level 3. So this will tell you the amount of support that a child needs in an ASD. Another question is, do symptoms of ASD change over time? Of course, because they improve with treatment and with age. However, take note that children whose language skills regress early in life before the age of 3 appear to have a higher than normal risk of developing epilepsy or seizure-like brain activity. And then when they get into adolescence, especially among the high-functioning ASDs, they usually develop mental health conditions like depression, anxiety disorder, even bipolar disorders, because they have a tendency to compare themselves with others and they feel that they are being rejected by their peers, okay? That is the reason why they need to continue having all those necessary services throughout their lives. I think I have already made mention of this. So how do we manage ASD? There still is no definite cure. However, we know that with therapies and in other interventions, they improve a lot, and that it should be a multidisciplinary management of their conditions, and that they may need to undergo behavioral interventions. In fact, the first step in the management of ASD is behavioral in the form of occupational therapy or ABA, applied behavioral analysis. And of course, very important is counseling. It is but normal for parents of children with developmental disabilities, not only with ASD, to go through the process of acceptance. And the very first thing is denial. I can say that about 50% of them, they tend to deny. And it's so hard for them to convince that they have to do something for their child and not just focus on the diagnosis, so much so that this usually result in a delayed intervention. What is the indication for giving medication? We usually prescribe medicine if they start to hurt themselves or other people around them. And the medications may consist of anti-epileptic drugs if they have seizures, and we also make use of antipsychotic drugs like your aripiprazole and risperidone, which actually are antipsychotic drugs. Now, what about this alternative or complement therapies? These still are very controversial. So much so that I always advise parents that if they have limited finances, they should just course their finances to therapy and not to using this alternative and or controversial treatments. But I always say to them also to keep an open mind, right? Because we do not know if through the years, this may also be helpful, okay? But between this and therapies, you need to prioritize therapy. Now, what about prognosis? Take note. There is normal life expectancy. They can live to adulthood. However, we know that the most severe cases will continue to be dependent on their families. They develop aggressive and self-injured behaviors, even seizures at that. So here is a patient of mine who is obviously of the severe type. And what he does continuously is to pick on his skin until it bleeds. All right. So this child is on medication. Okay. Here is another patient of mine who keeps on biting his forearm to a certain extent that it has resulted into this callus formation. Okay, this patient is on medication. This is one of my worst patients in terms of self-injured and aggression. I saw him as early as 2.5 years old. He is now 30 plus years old. So that's how old I am, guys. Okay. In my practice, and you know what? He was diagnosed at 2.5, but he was destined to be severe. He never became verbal. They are well off. They can do therapies every day. They even did biological treatments outside of the country to a certain extent. Stem cell, which I must remind you, is not yet acceptable for ASD. Okay? So what he does is that when he goes into tantrums, he hits his cheek against tables and walls. He turns the house in topsy-turvy like this, destroying television, computers, name it. All right? Like this. And that it will take 4 people to really hold him, because otherwise only one cannot do that. Okay? Because he turns to kick them, scratch and bite them. And one day he has to be confined because he developed perichondritis because of repeated head banging and hitting his head and face with his fist like that. So I had to confine him. I had to do EEG. I had to give 2 types of medications. He often even have these facial abrasions and bruises from scratching and hitting his face against the wall. All right. So if you have a severe type of ASD, it really is very difficult for the family. It's very challenging. But what about the other side? What about mild ASD? I saw this child when he was around 2 years old. He came for follow-up at 4 years old, and take note how intelligent he is.
So there's this thing called the eardrum, which is very sensitive, and you should not break it while cleaning your ears, because if you break it while cleaning your ears, then you would hear nothing.
Wow.
Complete silence.
And that means you
And-
become deaf?
And there's there's these 3 tiny bones.
Oh my
The
God.
hammer and the anvil. Oh, wait, I just forgot the third.
It's okay.
the
Take
tiny
your time.
bone.
Take your time.
I forgot the 3rd tiny bone.
Because
Tell me
Tita
next
Dom
time,
doesn't
right?
remember too.
Here's the cochlea. So if you spin around on a spinning chair or spin by yourself, then it would slowly start to drain into the liquids in the cochlea.
Wow. And that will cause what?
Dizziness.
Oh, so you should not.
Spin too much because it would empty the cochlea and you would be super dizzy.
Wow.
Do you know that? I cannot relate anymore with that. Okay, so this is another patient of mine. And I was just asking him, do you have a crush? Would you like to have a girlfriend? Would you like to marry someday? Oh, look at his answer.
I don't want to have a crush. I want to have a girlfriend, and I don't want to be married.
Forever?
Yes.
Forever
I don't
Tita
want-
Doc.
Crush out.
All right. Honestly, I have not seen a patient of mine who had a girlfriend and got married, but I have a colleague whose son is high functioning at ASD and has a girlfriend. All right. This is another child who loves to talk about the liquid, the gas, and the
which can change like solid to liquid and liquid to gas and even gas to solid without even going through a liquid transformation.
Wow.
There's some matters which can
So take note of their intonation, right? As if they're born in another country. But the first patient who talk about the ears is from Bulacan, wherein supposed to be the medium of communication there is really Tagalog, as in Tagalog, right? Okay, this one loves to sing.
When I see your face,
He's not looking at me.
think I wanna change. Cause girl, you're amazing.
Okay. Another one who is very artistic. He is into Legos. This one, calligraphy.
Here is thousand.
Another gifted child of mine with ASD, as early as I think he was only 4 years old when he was doing this. Okay. And in fact, in one of our conventions, he already had a display of this. Okay. Oh, wow, that's me. All right. I was interviewed by Karen Davila, and obviously this is the son of Karen Davila. You know for a fact that he has ASD. And way back pre-pandemic, there is this parent in Blue Ridge wherein they put up a puzzle cafe. And their children, these are their children with ASDs, they are there to work as waiters or even cashiers and so on, okay? This one became a magna cum laude, all right? But he came to me during his, I think, second or third year in college at Ateneo de Manila. And I just, I just asked him to please, if I can get a video recording of what he's doing, because by doing so, it might inspire the other parents. And you listen to what he said, and obviously, this is during the time that Duterte won as president.
Okay.
This is sound. Hi, I'm Ezekiel Lagmay. You can call me Kiel. Well, the first time I met you, Dr. Eusebio, was back when I was 3 years old. And my parents really have no idea how come I wasn't able to speak at that age. And then all of a sudden, thank you, God, He gave you the wisdom to diagnose me with autism. And eventually, thank God, my parents also were given a direction to for early intervention. And
Right now,
right now, she has helped me with my college concerns, especially GIP and immersion. Well,
you tell us what are you taking now?
and right now I am taking BS Computer Science
Where?
in Ateneo de Manila University.
And you have a crush.
And yes, I just have one close friend. Not necessarily a crush.
Oh, no crush.
Thanks, Tita Doc.
But why did you vote for Duterte again?
First of all, he wants lesser cars and more mass transport. Second, he wants a parliamentary government. And third, because Philippines is a failing nation, he wants a constitutional convention.
Okay, he voted for Duterte. That's why. All right, this is an acronym that was given, I think, by a parent describing autism, and he says that autism stands for always unique, totally interesting, sometimes mysterious. Okay. Oh, what do you see in there? There's my picture. Okay. The mother made a picture, and I gave my picture as an ID for the child so that whenever he goes into tantrums, she will show my picture. Oh my gosh. All right. So this is a patient of mine who now is also around 20s or 30s. So that ends the very lengthy lecture on ASD, but I hope that I was able to impart to you the importance of really knowing very much ASD, because that is the most common condition that we see. I will move on to two things, but I need to answer first two questions. Hello po, Doc. We were taught before that ASD tends to be more common in boys, and there are studies that imply atypical presentation for girls. Well, I have already mentioned to you that the ratio, boy to girl ratio, is 4 boys, 1, right? Well, girls, they also show the same thing, but before I thought girls are milder, but now I have several patients also who are severe. Okay, my brother has mild autism and he speaks the same doc. Then he often talks about history naman po, right? They can talk of anything that interests them. You know, I have a patient who came to my clinic and I was talking about the stock exchange and I cannot even relate to him at all, right? And then there is a patient who would like to talk about the different countries, all the capitals of countries all over the world, and the different types of dinosaurs. Oh, see, I mean, it depends upon the interest of the child. Okay, let's just have a 2-minute break. Any other questions? Okay, let's have a 2-minute break just to breathe a little bit. All right, so let's move on. I will now go into the concerns of parents during the school age period, and these are ADHD and learning disability. All right. All right, ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And I would like also to emphasize that ADHD and ADD are one and the same. Okay? Because there still are parents who would be asking me, Doc, is my child ADD or ADHD? They are one and the same, and the most acceptable term is ADHD. Okay? So these are the descriptions of parents and even teachers of children with ADHD. Malikot, makulit, acting like a little supervisor, spaceman, hyper, parang kiti-kiti. And I'm sure there are some of you now who are exhibiting this. Okay? You know, I love to have a face-to-face class because I can immediately spot a student with ADHD. Okay? So what is ADHD? It is a childhood onset. So again, it is inborn neurobehavioral disorder characterized by 3 core symptoms: inattention, impulsivity, and hyperactivity. And just like ASD, it is not a fad. It is not new. It dates back in the early 19th century. Initially, it was even termed like a minimal brain damage, hyperkinetic reaction of childhood. And it was in 1980 that ADD was already placed in the DSM-3. And right now in the DSM-5, what is acceptable is the term attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And this is started in the year 2000. Okay? So ADHD is relatively common. It accounts for 30 to 40% of referrals. And just like ASD, it is more common in boys. So do you agree now, Paulo Fabros, that boys are of the weaker sex? Okay. As to incidence, the median age or the estimated prevalence of children with ADHD is 2 to 12%, with a mean of 5.2%. One question of parents is that, is ADHD lifelong? It says here that up to 65% of children with ADHD continue to experience the disorder into adulthood. And I can fully relate to this because I have some colleagues who are deaf pediatrists who have ADHD as well. Okay? Now, what causes ADHD? I hope that you have this, you will not believe these prevailing misconceptions and that these are not true at all. And you have to correct the parents when they say that it probably is because my child is kulang sa pansin, it is just temporary, it will be outgrown. Well, he's a boy and it is typical for boys to be hyper, just like it's typical for boys to be late in their speech. Or maybe because he's eating a high sugar food, he has allergy, or maybe because we as parents are not good disciplinarians, or the teacher is not teaching him the right conduct, okay? All of these are not true. What is true is that ADHD is a heterogeneous behavioral disorder with multiple possible etiologies, but one of these is it is strongly genetic, and that it can be brought about by neurobiologic and CNS insults, and there can be environmental factors that may be contributory as well. Talking about heritability, take note that the percentage is even higher in ADHD than that of schizophrenia, with a mean heritability of 0.75. The theory is that the frontal lobe, which is the center for inhibition, regulation, and control, is affected in ADHD. So this is now the neurobiology of ADHD. So that when a PET scan is done, it shows decreased cerebral metabolism in brain areas controlling attention. And the other thing is that it is a biochemical imbalance. So much so that whether you like it or not, medication plays a very important role in the management of ASD. But as mentioned, there can be environmental contributions or factors that may be risk factors for ADHD, including cigarette and alcohol exposure, mental health problems in a conceiving mother, and even psychosocial adversity. So much so that as far as possible etiologic factors, it is an interplay of genes, of environment, of behavior, and that is the one that probably are responsible. These are the ones that probably are contributory to having an ADHD in a child. So I have already mentioned the core symptoms. And mind you, there are early indicators. When I get a history, specifically a maternal history, one of the things that I often ask the mother is, when you were pregnant, mommy, how was your child inside the womb? Oh, doc, he was kicking most of the time as if he wants to get out already. So even in utero, the child is already exhibiting hyperactivity, okay? And when the child is born, the parents again notice this. He is quite irritable or unusually irritable at night, crying most of the time, very brief periods of quiet sleep. And when he starts to walk, doc, he's not walking, he's running already. So those are the early signs of ADHD. But mind you, we do not make a diagnosis of ADHD before the age of 4. Why? Remember the runabout stage, the toddler stage, right? That it is but normal for children to be hyper between the ages of 2 to 4. But nowadays, our children go to school as early as 3, right? And therefore, the teachers and the parents can compare the child, their child with the other children in class, and therefore they come to us even as early as 3 years of age. Okay, so we only put there at risk for ADHD, but not yet a definitive diagnosis of ADHD. So what are the signs and symptoms of hyperactivity? So you see a child who is always on the go, as if driven by a motor. He moves around the classroom, he runs, he climbs excessively wherever he is. And that even in church, even in social occasions, and when he is seated, he is fidgety, he is squirmy, as some of you are doing it now, and that they talk excessively. Of course, I'm not ADHD, right? Okay, next would be signs and symptoms of inattention, but I will just show you one video of a child with ADHD.
Start.
My gosh. All right. What about the signs and symptoms of impulsivity? Usually, they cannot wait for their turn, right? And when in class, even if he's not being asked, he tends to interrupt. Or when you as parents are talking, he would tend to butt in during conversations. What about the signs and symptoms of inattention? Of course, there is short attention span. He tends to commit careless mistakes in class, and they often dislike writing. Why? Because it requires a lot of attention for you to write, and that they often forget what you are asking them to do because they're not listening. Okay, so other signs and symptoms would be they are disorganized. They often lose some of their things in school. A mother would often say, I have to replace the set of pencils that he brings to school, and that as mentioned, they are forgetful. Even as simple as toothbrushing, the mother has to remind them day in, day out. Okay? This is actually and there is no sound, but this is I've gotten that from an ABS-CBN clip video. There are some of you who are doing that a lot, right? That is what we mean by being fidgety, huh? Okay. So you would often hear that in ADHD, the executive functions are impaired. And this basically are the functions in the brain that are responsible for focus, right? Effort, emotion, memory, and so on. Okay? So there are three clinical subtypes of ADHD. The majority of them belong to the combined 50 to 75%. Then you have the inattentive type in 20 to 30%, and the hyperactive impulsive type less than 15%. Between boys and girls, the manifestations may be different because predominantly in girls, it's the inattentive type that they present. That's why they usually are diagnosed late. And the they are staring blankly in space, and that is basically a sign of inattention. Okay? This is a question that is often posed by parents as well. Is ADHD outgrown, or are the criteria for ADHD outgrown? Take note that in children, they exhibit signs of hyperactivity, inattention, and impulsivity. But as they grow older, the hyperactivity often tends to disappear, the impulsivity also, but the inattention remains. Okay? So ADHD coexists with other conditions. In fact, its presence is more the rule rather than the exception, and that only 30% will have pure ADHD. And in those with comorbidities, more than 80% have one comorbidity and 60% have at least two comorbidities. And the comorbidities, they tend to appear as the child grows older, as you can see here. And these are the common comorbidities in ADHD, the most common of which is oppositional defiant disorder. And autism, and this still is being termed as Asperger's, can coexist with ADHD. So how do we make a diagnosis of ADHD? Again, a good history, and you have to interview the teachers, the parents, or make the parents fill up a behavioral checklist. You're familiar with the Conners, the Vanderbilt, and that you have to make sure that there are no sensory impairments, like for instance, hearing impairment, because HI can also exhibit in the hyperactivity as a manifestation. So this is the behavioral rate termed as corners, which should be filled up by the parent as well as the teacher. And based on the DSM-5, this is the diagnostic criteria for ADHD. So just like ASD, there are no laboratory tests, but you have to make use of this diagnostic criteria to make a diagnosis or to have a diagnosis of ADHD. So it says here that a child should exhibit 6 or more of the signs and symptoms of ADHD under inattention and hyperactivity impulsivity, and that the duration of this symptom should be equal to or more than 6 months. And take note, the onset is before 12 years old. In the DSM-4, it used to be before 7 years old, and that the signs and symptoms should be happening or should be observed in at least 2 or more settings. So much so that if it is only seen at home but not in school or vice versa, that is not ADHD. And that the signs and symptoms are developmentally age inappropriate, and that it is causing an impairment in social, academic, and even occupational functioning among adults, and that you should have excluded other conditions that may bring about signs and symptoms of ADHD. So what is the difference now of the ADHD criteria from DSM-4 and DSM-5? So as mentioned, for older adolescents and adults, you only need to have more than or equal to 5 symptoms. And that the onset now is age before 12 from 7, remember? And that there are also modifiers in terms of severity, and that ASD is not anymore an exclusionary diagnosis, because it used to be that if you have ASD, it cannot coexist with ADHD. So that should be very clear. And that you should be able to rule out other psychiatric or medical disorders that may bring about hyperactivity in a child, as simple as the use of an anticonvulsant like phenobarbital, which can also has a side effect of hyperactivity. So how do we manage ADHD? Well, they can go into regular schooling for as long as they are being managed behavior-wise, and the use of medication, okay? Educating the parents and the family, the family and the patients is very important, because a lot of times parents do not seem to understand that the child's condition is not of his own doing, but it is because it is something that was given to him by his parents, actually. So I always tell to the parents, please do not blame your child, because it's either you have given that to him or your family has given that to him, because this is strongly hereditary. And in the classroom, we always tell the parents or the teachers to sit the child in front for lesser distractions and for closer supervision. Ideally, there should be lesser number of students inside the classroom as well for lesser distractions. So, talking about medication, it remains to be one of the most successful treatments for ADHD, because, as I have mentioned earlier, it is a biochemical imbalance in the brain, all right? And I can even show you, and there is also an evidence-based studies to prove this, that in this study, they made use of the ideal, which is a combination of medication plus behavioral therapy versus medication treatment only. And you notice that it is more or less comparable in terms of its benefit on a patient with ADHD. But again, I'm sure you know that there still are a lot of parents who are not willing to put their children on medication. But mind you, medication is magic. It really is magic because we know that it is biochemical imbalance in the brain, and the medicine increases the neurotransmitter in the synapses of these children with ADHD. That is your methylphenidate, and you have your atomoxetine. So as far as medications that are approved by FDA, is still the first line is your psychostimulant. How ironic that you give a stimulant to a child who is already overstimulated. Why? How do you explain that to the parents? Because this medication will just target that area of the brain which is dormant, and it will stimulate it to balance the imbalance that is the overstimulated part of the brain. The inhibitory center is the one that is being targeted by the medicine. You also have noradrenergic reuptake inhibitor, which is your atomoxetine. So what do we have in the Philippines? We have Concerta and Ritalin, as well as Strattera. These are other alternative medications, but not approved by FDA. When there was still no methylphenidate, we have been using clonidine, which is actually an antihypertensive agent, but it's not as successful as when you use your psychostimulant. So therefore, the first line is psychostimulant, second line, and then third line, okay? So the stimulants are found to improve the core symptoms and the other symptoms. However, take note that psychostimulants have also problems in terms of side effects, like it decreases the appetite, it increases the occurrence of tics, and that it needs a yellow prescription pad in order for you to be able to avail of it, okay? And it also causes insomnia. Traditional therapies, I'm sure you have been hearing again about dietary management, high doses of vitamin B complexes, DHA, and so on. These are still alternative and controversial treatments. ADHD impacts on all aspects of the child's life, from the very beginning when they are still children to adolescents to adults. And these are the areas where it impacts. Relationships, like children, they are often, they tend to avoid a child with ADHD. Why? Because a child with ADHD usually is impulsive. He tends to hurt even if he's not really intentional in doing it. And therefore, when he's being rejected, he develops low self-esteem. He is prone to a lot of injuries. And when they become adolescents, they usually engage in a lot of risk-taking behaviors, including smoking and substance abuse, vehicular accidents. When they are adults, they go from one course to the other. They do not have permanent relationships, even when in marriage, and that they go from one job to the other. So it impacts on all aspects of the life of an individual, okay? So much so that if it is untreated, this is the burden, meaning financial burden that it brings to the family and to the community and to the society as a whole. So as I've mentioned, ADHD can go on and on up to adulthood. So around 50 to 60% of them will continue to exhibit the signs and symptoms, and 10 to 15% of them may have significant psychiatric or antisocial problems. There is a very high incidence of substance abuse among children with ADHD who were untreated. But you also have to remember that there are successful people all over the world who have or who had ADHD. All right, so ADHD is not yet curable, but certainly manageable. And thank you for staying focused as far as ADHD is concerned. Moving on to the last, it is Learning disability, I have 10 minutes to discuss that. And I hope that you're still with me, guys. Sorry for that. Oh, see, one of you said he has ADHD because he is squirmy and fidgety with his feet. All right. I love to hear that. And I know that. Okay. So now moving on to learning disability. And this is also another problem among school-age children. And I just would like to refresh your mind that if a child is failing in class, it could just be possibly an intrinsic condition like he has learning disability, ADHD, or sensory impairments like visual or hearing impairments. He might be chronically ill. He must be emotionally disturbed. But there can also be family extrinsic conditions like family dysfunctions, social problems, and even ineffective schooling. Okay, so what is LD? LD refers to a number of disorders which may affect the acquisition, organization, understanding, or use of a spoken or written language, which may manifest in the child's imperfect ability to listen, to speak, to read, to write, and to do mathematical calculations. Take note that LDs are inborn. So again, it has nothing to do with the environment. And that before you make a diagnosis of LD or learning disability, you should have ruled out causes of learning difficulties, like I have mentioned already earlier on, and that LD can coexist with ADHD. For your information, there is now a change in the terminology from learning disability to specific learning disorder in the DSM-5. And but as I go along, I will still be using the term learning disability, but this is something that you have to know. Okay? And these are the different types of learning disorders. Of course, reading difficulties, dyslexia, mathematical is dyscalculia, writing is dysgraphia, and fine motor skill, also sensory integration disorder. You have dysgraphia. You also have dysphagia, auditory and visual processing disorders. Just like the rest, the exact etiology for LD is unknown, but there can be contributory factors. One of these, again, is genetics. So when you get the history, the parents would often say, oh, I repeated grade 4 twice. I was not able to finish school. Well, obviously, there is a learning difficulty. But there are also environmental factors, like, for instance, the baby was born premature or the baby had a toxic perinatal course. So in both ADHD and LD, we are seeing most, or if not most, premature babies turning out to have ADHD and LD. Okay? And how would you describe the brain of a child with LD? You make an analogy. You imagine a television wherein one of the wires is not functioning. Then you see a distorted image. So in other words, in LD, the ears, the hearing, the vision are intact. But the input from these sensory areas, when they get into the brain has a problem in processing it. And therefore, that is what is happening in the brains of these children. So how common are LDs? They are even more common than intellectual disability, okay? And what is the most common type of LD? It's dyslexia. All right. So what are the presentations or signs and symptoms of a child with LD? Of course, they are underachieving in school. They have academic difficulties, but mind you, majority of them, they come to us because of behavioral problems in class. Because they are usually diagnosed late because they think that the parents think that the reason maybe why the child is underachieving is because he's not motivated and so on. Okay, and they often blame the child. That's why there is a book on children with LD, and it is even entitled The Misunderstood Child. Okay, because when you talk to them, they are very street smart, but when you ask them to read and to spell, oh my God, you see how difficult it is with them how to do that. Okay, so what are the signs and symptoms of LDs across the different ages? Take note again. Language delay is one of them. So please do not take for granted language delay because it can be a precursor for a learning disability. Or when a child is now in kindergarten and he's supposed to master the alphabet, oh my God, it's taking him forever. All right? Or when he is being asked to write, it is also taking him forever. So this goes on and on until you notice them when they are now into formal schooling that they are diagnosed already to have LD. You imagine a child with LD, do you think he will be able to follow this very complicated arrows? It is a very challenging one. I have a patient who is 5 years old. He's writing, the mother says, oh, my child dog is very artistic. Oh, all of the letters are almost dead. All right. And then this is already a 6-year-old child. And if you take a look at his writing of the letters of the alphabet, what do you notice? There still is a lot of sequencing. I mean, there still is sequencing difficulty. A, B, C, and then it goes to E, F, and then, and so on. And then you have a child who obviously has also problem with dyscalculia or is not able to read the minor. Therefore, everything becomes a mistake. And then you have a 7-year-old who is very good in talking. But when you ask him to spell simple words, which are that of a preschool, like a 6-year-old child, she still cannot do that. Again, an 8-year-old female with spelling difficulty. Very immature drawing, right? And this child is already 9 years of age. So the good enough Harris Draw a Person test can also be an indirect way of testing the approximate developmental age of a child. This is a 10-year-old female. He is in grade 4, but would often write her name Cecilia. Inverted at that, she is Maria Cecilia. All right, this is one way to test the spelling. Just encircle one down the word that is underlined there that is similar to it. Then, of course, a child with LD will often commit such mistakes. So how do we evaluate LD? You have to go back to the very basic, but very importantly, you have to rule out hearing and vision or visual problems. In fact, there are some parents, when they bring their children to me, their children are now on eyeglasses. And when I ask the mother, what is the grade? It's just 50. And so I said, why did you put her on eyeglasses? Because she cannot read. So it's not a problem of visual acuity, but it is a problem of how the brain processes what the child sees, okay? Well, it says in the DSM-5 that they are not making use of the IQ test now as a means to diagnose LD, but it used to be that there is a significant 15-point and above difference between the performance and the verbal IQ, which simply means that when you differentiate using the WISC-R or an IQ test, between an ID, intellectual versus learning disability, there usually is a difference of 15 points in the performance and verbal IQ in LD, but the overall IQ is normal. In ID, the IQ is 2 standard deviations below the average, okay? So one of the most common problems with LD is that they go into mental health problems because of lowered self-esteem, etc., etc. It can coexist with ADHD. About 15 to 25% of ADHDs have learning disability, and that the management is simply to achieve academic competence and to prevent secondary emotional or socio-emotional problems. Educational intervention is the cornerstone of treatment. They can be in regular schools, but they have to be in a school with provisions for accommodations or pull-outs for one-on-one tutorials as necessary. So management is basically to bypass the deficits, but you know what? In our traditional schooling, we still do not have much of this. So for dyslexic children, they can present the teaching material by oral methods. For dysgraphic children, also you give them extra time to write, and then they can use oral rather than written exam. For dyscalculic children, you allow them to make use of calculators. Most LDs improve in time, but they do not really recover to normality. Dyslexic, among dyslexics, the best reading ability that they can is about that of a grade 6 level. But you know naman, it's not all about IQ in this day and age. What matters most is EQ, right? So with proper help, children with LD can become quite successful later in life. And these are, again, the successful people who were able to be successful really in their own field, even if they have had LDs. So I think I'm just on time, and I hope that I was able to share with you the things that I would like you to bring with you as you go into the clinics later on in life. All right? Any questions? It's 10 o'clock. And I just would like to see everyone's faces. I think you have an attendance though, but I just want to see your faces because it would have been nice for me to see you face to face, guys. I love teaching for the past 35 years in front of students like you, but now